there seems to be a sense at the moment that we need to find someone to blame for this, which I find a bit unfortunate, really, because I think in the end, sometimes terrible things do happen and it's not always somebody's fault.
No, but we have to make some sense of what happened. It's important for people to, I mean, that's why everyone, you know, from the press to social media, whatever, being found accountable, because we have to make some sense of what seems a completely extraordinary and awful, tragic killing, you know, suicide of a young girl. And actually, in truth, I think all of these parts, from ITV to the press to social media to the CPS, they're all culpable in some way because, you know, it's part, not individually, but it's part of obviously a bigger and more threatening picture that you know, Caroline Flack had in her mind, which ultimately caused her to take her own life.
Yeah. I mean, there are those, of course, who will say that the whole sort of culture that we've created around reality TV is not entirely healthy for people, particularly those people who might be a bit mentally vulnerable.
Well, I think to a degree that's true, but of course Caroline wasn't a contestant, she was a presenter, which puts it, and I think, you know, the fact she presented Love Island is just a very sad coincidence. But I do think what it does bring into play is, you know, people in the public eye that we've always assumed, where we know that the contestants are vulnerable and there's work being done to make sure they have support. For people who present programmes, there is the implicit assumption, I think that's where our shock came from, that they will be able to cope, that they have, you know, those coping mechanisms that sort of get what the press or social media are throwing at them. In this case, clearly not. And that's, I think, where we need to look.
Yeah.
You know, who's supporting those people?
I mean, as far as the kind of... And nobody knows for sure what was in Caroline's mind. Nobody knows for sure what might have affected her decision. And nobody really understands any of that, and we probably never will. But, you know, the one thing that we can say that's new in this whole conversation, there's always been press intrusion, there's always been television companies that made shows that might be termed exploitative. What is new, I think, in all of this is the way that ordinary people can get a Twitter account or an Instagram account or a Facebook account and just hurl horrible barbs, nasty abuse and just disgraceful words at people they don't even know.
I agree, and I think there's sort of 2 points going on there. One is that when they see the press go on the attack, then they see it sort of green-lit for them to be able to see the same thing, because if the press is doing it, why shouldn't they? And I'm not saying the press shouldn't cover these kind of stories. They should, but they should do them particularly with far less salacious, cruel headlines. There needs to be a more empathetic way of covering these stories that aren't on the attack. And secondly, as Twitter... You know, it drives the good people off Twitter. When you see this sort of thing, people think, oh, do you know what, I don't want to be on the social platform anymore. It's all angry people. It's all people being abusive. And so what happens is you get this kind of polarised Twitterati that are literally, you know, it's the cruel ones that sort of stand head and shoulders above everybody else because the good guys don't like it anymore.
But is it part of the problem as well, though, Joe, that basically... much of the abuse comes from people who are anonymous, who don't have proper accounts, who are not properly policed, and who basically could do whatever they like, safe in the knowledge that nobody will ever know who they are?
Yes, I think a great deal of it is that. I mean, it happened to me recently. I actually reported somebody, and there were 3 or 4 really unpleasant tweets. Twitter came back to me and said, we haven't found any hate in there. So they carried on. So
well, the Twitter rules for banning people are quite bizarre. I mean, I've had death threats. I've had people threatening to shoot me, people telling me there's a bullet with my name on it, and apparently that doesn't violate the Twitter rules. Yeah,
so I think the Twitter rules need some fairly urgent review.
I don't know if that's just the rules for me, by the way. I don't know.
Well... no, it's wrong for every. I mean, it's horrible when it happens to you, and it
is.
Sort of gathers pace. It has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Other people join in the bundle, and then suddenly there's a tsunami of vileness heading in your direction. And I don't understand in their rules why they can't see that cumulative effect, if you like. It's not individuals; it's just them all piggybacking on each other for attention. How that is unacceptable.
And do you see any way that this will change? Because clearly, you know, people will go into their kind of go back into their shells, perhaps to some extent, when something like this happens. Because even the really horrible people know that it's probably not a very good time to be horrible. But it doesn't ever change anything, does it?
I mean, that worries me. Something else fundamental needs to change, because I think what happens is we've got this outpouring of people saying, be kind. And actually, I'm afraid the way our press and the way Twitter works currently is not that we're kind. We don't want to see lots of jolly little kind tweets. It doesn't get our engagement, and it doesn't make them thrive. They don't make money out of that if people aren't engaging with the tweets. So it's sort of encouraging the dark side of us implicitly to come out, and that's just so many shades of wrong. So something has to change.
Yeah,
but
also by the same token, Joe, I would say that you have to be very careful as well, do you not, about saying to newspapers, well, you can't be critical anymore, because in the end there's a big difference between somebody writing a column which is critical of someone but done it in a way which is what you might consider to be acceptable. It starts to go down a dangerous road if you say, well, you can't be critical of anybody.
Indeed, it totally does. So I think you can be critical, and what I really find the worst are the headlines, because that's what you see in huge capital letters screaming at you from the front of certain tabloids. And, even if what they wrote, which I don't think at the moment is particularly well-written or empathetic, you don't see that. You just see this relentless flow of hideous headlines. And that, I think, needs to change. Report on it by all means, but just give it a bit of consideration.
So we're going to talk now to Dr. Kate Mason, clinical psychologist and head of mental health training at Onset Welfare. I'm just reading, Dr. Kate, a very good morning to you. I'm just reading in the Times this morning an interview of a piece, by Polly Vernon, who met Caroline Flack a few years back. And tragically, it's a very interesting read, all about the kind of woman that she encountered, the kind of person that she found. And at the end of the piece, she says, I asked her how she thought people most misunderstood her, and she replied, I think people think I think higher of myself than I do, but you can't go around shouting I'm not as confident as you think I am, which is quite revealing, really, isn't it?
It really is, and it just shows, especially with the powers of social media and all things like that, is that what people in the public eye portray on the outside, it's almost this perfect filtered mask of, you have to be confident when you're on TV, you have to ooze confidence, but actually what it can be masking is something so much more sinister underneath, and we don't get to see that. And I think people think that these people in the public eye are more robust than they actually are, that they can take online abuse and things like that, and actually it could be just a straw that broke the camel's back, and people can just their tolerance can just become very, very low for it, and can result in something as awful as this.
Yeah, it really is dreadful, and lots of people looking for a reason for it. I sometimes wonder whether that's a bit of a fatuous exercise, because sometimes some things just happen. It's not necessarily the cause of one thing or another, is it?
No. And I think as well, again, I think what's made it so shocking is that we all feel like we know her, and we all feel, she's on our screens all the time. Like you say, she's vivacious, she's bubbly. And I think, underneath it could be a multitude of things that are going on. We know that sort of risk factors for things like suicide and certainly depression are things like trauma, increasing amounts of stress. We know that she had a lot of stress going on in her life in the run-up to that. But we can't speculate really exactly what it was that was caused, because it could be a multitude of things that even we don't know about.
No, quite. And as far as social media goes, I mean, as a clinical psychologist, what is the effect of something like that? I mean, if you're reading social media constantly, which a lot of people find themselves doing. Some people this morning have said to me it's a bit like heroin now, social media. If you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram or Snapchat, you're looking at it constantly. You're getting fed this kind of constant diet of either praise or absolutely disgusting criticism. It's quite a difficult thing if you haven't been trained how to deal with that, to deal with.
It really is, and that's what we try and do as part of our training at Onset Welfare, is that we help people to understand, and we make sure that we assess contestants to make sure they understand just how significant, them appearing on a TV show can actually be. 1 minute you're adored by millions, and the next minute you're completely abandoned, and it's such extremes. It's very difficult for people to cope with sometimes, and they think they can, but actually when it comes to the reality of it, especially when you get people with their opinions, sometimes positive, but also sometimes negative, it's very, very difficult to try and get your head around that, because we all want, as human beings, we all want to be accepted by other people. We all want to be liked. So actually when it turns negative and it turns sour, that can feed into lots of feelings of abandonment and rejection. And for some people, it's just too much.
And for people who do that kind of thing on social media, who do go after celebrities, and I mean, what is their motivation, and what is their psychosis about doing that?
Well, I think there could be a bit of envy, a bit of jealousy going on there. You never know. But I think one powerful thing about this is that you can hide behind social media, because I can guarantee most of the people that drop these awful, awful comments, if you put that person right in front of them and ask them to repeat it, I doubt they would. I think the thing about things like social media is that you can hide behind it. You can hide behind a persona, and quite often you can't be found as well. So I think that has got a lot to answer for.
And would you then urge the social media companies to be more sort of cautious in how they allow people to access things like Twitter and Facebook? I don't know how they would do that, but I'm sure they could do better than they are doing.
I would absolutely. I mean, it's a form of bullying, isn't it? At the end of the day, it is bullying, and we don't stand for it in schools. So why should we stand for it online?
Terrible tragedy that happened on Saturday afternoon was the suicide of Caroline Flack. She took her own life after being told sometime before the previous day that her prosecution and her court case was indeed going to go ahead, in which she was charged with attacking her boyfriend. He had asked for the charges not to be brought. It seems as though she had found herself unable to deal with what was going on. Let's find out from Jack exactly what the Daily Star is writing about today. Jack, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Your front page today has a lovely picture of Caroline Flack and her boyfriend Lewis Burton with the headline, "My Heartache, Boyfriend Talks of Turmoil as ITV Faces Backlash." I mean, it seems as though everyone's facing a backlash over this today.
It is really. When something so tragic like this happens, everyone immediately just rushes to point the finger and try and find someone to blame, really. But I think with someone like Caroline, who was so universally loved, everyone is just shocked and saddened by it. So, as you said before, everyone from like the CPS to the media to just Twitter trolls to the general public have found themselves blamed by someone or other for what's happened over the past 48 hours.
Sure.
But I think, to be honest with you, it's more personally, I think it's the society as a whole. We've all got our little part to play. I think we put celebs on a massive pedestal, which just isn't realistic for a lot of people. And behind closed doors, it's not as glamorous and as glitzy as the media and TV make out, and social media, to be fair.
Sure. And what's your sense, Jack, of what happens next? Because obviously Love Island didn't go out on ITV last night. They said it will go out tonight. There are those who say Caroline would have wanted it that way, that she wouldn't have wanted the show to be cancelled. But there's going to be pressure, presumably, because of what's gone before in terms of the contestants and the tragedies that have happened to the show previously, that people will be saying, is this really the sort of television that we should be producing?
I mean, you're right, it's an absolute sort of minefield. So the show's back on tonight as normal. They're going to have a tribute to Caroline. The initial plan is for the show to return in the summer, but I just don't know if the public appetite is there anymore. It's still one of the biggest shows on TV, but with the past we've had 2 contestants now, and obviously Caroline, who we've lost, and it just seems that the public appetite isn't there, the tide's turning. I think even with reality TV in general, we've had so many shows which encourage drama, because that's what people want to watch on telly, but at the same time, a show as big as Love Island has been absolutely rocked to the core, and I don't see it personally coming back in the summer. I think it needs to go away and maybe possibly set on the model, to be honest with you.
Yeah, interesting. Stay with us, Jack, if you would. Because I was asking you earlier just what the kind of atmosphere is like in the sort of the Love Island family, if you like. You were very much part of that 2017 show. And what are you and your friends and the people around Love Island talking about this morning?
We're all obviously devastated. This is the third time this sort of thing has happened, and I don't think it's necessarily related to Love Island with Caroline Flack. I think the biggest problem here is social media. I think the media itself has a part to blame in the Caroline Flack situation, but I think social media and the trolling and the lack of anyone doing anything about it, and for people just to say, well, it's freedom of speech and people can say what they want, I think is absolutely awful. The things that people say on social media are some of the time illegal, and they have no they don't do anything about it, and I think it's absolutely disgusting.
Do you think it should be tighter control then? Is that where you think this should go?
100%. I think I think they should knuckle down on it massively. You know, I've had death threats. I've been made to feel like I'm being followed. I've had people say the most horrific things, and people can say it without a face. People can say it behind a screen and pretend to be someone they're not, and it's scary. And the things that people say, like I said, are just absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a tweet here from somebody called Nick who says, is social media becoming more harmful than drugs? It's more addictive and it's taking lives, and it's digital heroin. I mean, these are the kinds of things that people are saying. Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah, I just think that even now, and I think I've read through a couple of Caroline's comments and stuff, not Caroline herself, but people that have been commenting, and the things that people are still saying, and I can't even believe it. I can't believe that Mark Wahlberg, whatever his name is, the Facebook owner himself is saying that it's not his problem, and that he doesn't even know what the laws are around it. Well, it's his job to make sure that he does know what the laws are around it, and to put something in place to stop this from happening. Yeah. You know, people's thing is to say, just ignore the comments. Well, I'm sorry, but if you just sat and ignored the comments, firstly, there are some people at companies out there that won't work with you if you're being trolled too much. So, and also, you don't want children to see half the things that people write on your Instagram. It's offensive. It's rude. Some of the kids don't even know half these people are using. It's wrong.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. You make a great point, Tyler Carr from Love Island in 2017, saying she's had death threats. She's had the kind of horrible trolling that people who are in the public eye get. And guys, I'm with Eric McElroy and Neil Wallace here. There isn't any reason why the social media companies can't get on top of this, surely. I mean, they are capable of doing so. They're capable of blocking people when they want to. They need to really get to grips with this, I think.
It's will. The problem is, I hate to say this, but it'll cost them money. It would cost them a large amount of money to properly police this, and it could affect their sign-up numbers, as it were, and that will is not there to spend that money to do that. And eventually they're going to have to be forced into it, because they are not going to do it voluntarily. And you have the added complication, of course, is that where are they based? Some of them are based in America, the big ones we know about, but lots of others are based elsewhere in the world. How do you apply a law to... is it Telegram that is based in somewhere like Slovakia or somewhere? Right. How are you going to enforce that law there?
It's very difficult because you've got a worldwide problem, and you've also got free speech in America. Eric, you'll know about this, because in America they do actually properly have free speech, which we don't have really in this country.
That is true.
And so the culture from which Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all these other places come from is one which allows people to say whatever they want. My concern about this story, guys, is that everyone out there seems to be looking for somebody to blame. You know, is it the fault of the media? Is it the fault of social media trolling? Is it the fault of the ITV? Is it CPS who shouldn't be pressing the charges? I mean, you know, sometimes I don't think there is somebody to blame, is there?
Sometimes things just happen. Actually, there's a very good piece this morning, Mike, in the Daily Mail, that actually she's a lady who suffered, sadly, from mental health issues much of her life, and serious self-esteem issues, which she actually talked about at length. In a very helpful and brave way, actually. But this battle with mental health had been with her for a very long time. What a tragic way for it to end.
Absolutely awful. I mean, I was genuinely shocked when I got a sort of the news alert on my phone on Saturday afternoon. You know, it's not very often that those of us who've been in this business a long time go, oh my God, but it was one of those moments, Eric.
Well, I guess that's maybe why people are looking for someone to blame, is that someone who lived their life so much in the public eye. How could this not have been seen to be coming? Because, I mean, from the people who were actually close to her, and then, you know, in this TV reality world that she was in and everything else, how had they not known that this was happening, and that she was at least a risk, especially in the situation and the personal struggles that she's been in, you know, and everything else?
Well, I think that there was fear amongst her circle. I mean, one of her close friends actually spent the previous night with her because they were concerned about her, but went away because, she appeared to be perfectly well the next
day.
To the
shops, I think. Yeah, I know. It's an awful story. Let's talk to Paul Connew, columnist for the New European, former editor, of course, himself as well. Paul, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
It's a shocking story to talk about this, but we will be talking about it, and I suspect we'll be talking about it for quite a long time. There are many, Paul, who think that as a result of this, and as a result of what happened to Caroline Flack, that there may well be changes to the way that newspapers operate.
Well, there's a petition, which the last count, I think, is about 140,000, pressing for draconian press regulation because of Caroline Flack's death, which I think is very, very dangerous. And it's an hysterical blame game reaction on social media. Now, I didn't know. I met Caroline Flack a couple of times, but I wouldn't claim to really know her. But I know people who know her, and yes, she had her demons. It's a tragedy, but at the same time, we have to remember, just as the warnings we hear from the Samaritans and psychiatrists, that there are usually complex and several reasons why people commit suicide. So I think it's very simplistic to have this blame game. I mean, we've had some morons blaming her boyfriend for calling the police in the first place and saying he killed her. We've had people saying she was murdered by the tabloid press. We've had other people saying she was murdered by the CPS. Now, the CPS, it's open to question, but I have some sympathy with them because let's not forget, Mike, that we have a problem of domestic violence in this country. We've had cases where the police have failed to act on cases, and subsequently somebody's been murdered. So, the CPS, in a sense, are damned if they do and damned if they don't.
Well, that's right. I mean, again, we suffer, sadly, from a sort of an outbreak of ignorance from an awful lot of quarters, from people who don't really understand, one, the law, or two, many things about Caroline Flack. For example, the fact that she was friends with many journalists, that she did spend a lot of time with journalists, that she did understand what it was that she was in the middle of, and all of those things. And also the fact that, as you say, if domestic violence victims are people who, because they don't wish to press charges, there are no charges ever brought, is a nonsense. Clearly.
No, I mean, I got a lot of abuse on air on another station last night for pointing out that the CPS's difficulties, because there's some people saying, well, if the victim doesn't want the case dropped, that should automatically be the end of it. Of course, it isn't that simple.
I'm going to talk now to Nazir Afzal, former chief prosecutor, because a lot of the newspapers this morning obviously covering the very tragic news at the weekend that Caroline Flack took her own life. Many of them are saying that she feared a show trial. She was terrified, according to the Daily Mail, about a police body cam film of her. She had warned police officers that she would take her own life. There had apparently been some kind of a 999 crew visit to her home the day before she took her own life. Let's find out from Nazir precisely what he makes of the claims that the police should have gone easy on her. Nazir, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning to you.
Thanks very much for joining us. I mean, I'm slightly uneasy about this whole idea of blaming various organisations, whether it be the media, whether it be the police, whether it be ITV. I'm not sure that sometimes we shouldn't just absorb terrible news like this and understand that sometimes these things happen.
I agree with you. The blame culture, it's understandable. That's what we're like as a society. We always want somebody to, be held responsible. But I can only talk about the police and prosecution in this. I know from my experience of working with police officers and prosecutors for a quarter of a century that they take, firstly, domestic abuse very seriously. We have an epidemic in this country. 750,000 reports to police, 75,000 prosecutions a year. But every single one of them is treated exactly the same way. They look at the evidence. And in this case, as you said, there was a complainant who made an allegation. There was a 999 call that was recorded. The officers attended with body-worn camera, and they captured the scene and what's happening and who's saying what. There were interviews. There's medical evidence. And they took the view, as they would do with any other similar case, that this was a case worth putting before a court. They don't make the judgment. They just decided that there was enough for it to go before a court. Then, of course, you have the quite uncommon situation where the complainant withdraws and says they don't want to support the prosecution. And in those circumstances, because it happens so frequently, they have a process and they apply that process. Is there enough evidence? And they decided clearly there was still. And let the court decide. And, I think there are issues around duty of care. Who is responsible for looking after Caroline? Well, I would suggest that the defence lawyers would, they are meant to make the prosecution aware of any vulnerabilities. I don't know if they did or not. And additionally, communication has to be done in a very sensitive way. So those are things that I hope will come out during the next few days when people investigate it further. But I don't think you can attach any blame to police and prosecutors simply doing their job.
I mean, is there any onus on the CPS or indeed on the police at any point during an investigation to see whether there is vulnerability or to see whether an individual might not be quite strong enough to face charges? I mean, I don't imagine there is.
They have actually policy in place which says that you must look after the vulnerable people, and that means assess the vulnerability. But you've got to weigh that up against the seriousness of the crime. A lot of vulnerable people kill people, for example.
Yes.
And you wouldn't say they shouldn't be prosecuted with murder. So they have a balance to take. They decided in this case that the allegations were serious enough and the evidence was strong enough that it outweighed any concerns they had about her vulnerability. But, as I say, that's a judgment call based on what information they had. I don't know what information they had, but I assume that they had sufficient to be able to make that judgment.
Yes. And if you look at the numbers of people in domestic violence cases who decide for one reason or another they don't want to press charges against their partner, I mean, there's many of those cases which the police view as sort of undue influence being exerted or possibly bullying being going on. So there's no reason why, as some people have suggested, that should have meant that they didn't press ahead.
100%. We have a significant problem with that for all the reasons you mentioned and additional reasons. When men tend to withdraw their support for a prosecution because of shame, because they somehow feel that they are, they've brought it upon themselves.
Yes.
So there are all sorts of reasons why they may not pursue the prosecution. But that's why we have an independent prosecution service to make that judgment on behalf of us, the public, and not just on behalf of the person who's made the complaint.
Quite. And as far as the delay in the court system, just because of the sheer volume of cases and from what we've heard of the sort of the lack of resources, perhaps in some cases for the legal system in general, some people have been critical of the length of time that it takes from the incident to the charge to the actual court appearance. Is that a fair criticism that sometimes the longer that goes on, the more sort of stressful it can become?
You've put it better than I could. Absolutely right. It's shameful, actually, the amount of time it takes, and that is resources. There are fewer courts, fewer judges, fewer barristers, fewer prosecutors. That means that these cases do take longer than they should do. If they were dealt with in days, if not weeks, I think people would be able to see justice done, and they would also see that the trauma can be managed in some way. But if you are waiting 12 months, 18 months for the case to be finalised, well, I'm afraid we're re-traumatising them. The whole system is re-traumatising them, and we've got to really get a handle on this.
And what about the way that the CPS and the police will now kind of go? Will there be an investigation that is officially done into this if this happens?
Well, I mean, during my career, I think half a dozen people took their lives whilst we were prosecuting them, and in every single one of them, I look back at all the casework to make sure the right decisions were taken by the right people, and it's important to do that. It's also important to protect, or not protect, but to support the people who made the decision, because I remember how it impacted on me, thinking, hang on a minute, was I in some way responsible for somebody taking their life? And so it's important to provide support. Yes, absolutely important to understand and find out what happened. I'm hopeful that once this case has been finally discontinued, it has to be formally dropped in court, that the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Chief Prosecutors will open up to us and share with us their decision making, because I think the more transparency in anything, as you will appreciate, the more understanding.